got him. Yeah, his
Graham?
camera's not on, but I got him.
Okay. Well, I mean, Graham's a very shy person.
Oh, I apologize. I wasn't aware that you guys were doing the camera thing now. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know what? You're just going to have to learn, or you're not coming on again. That's it.
I'll be ready next time. I'm sorry,
No,
fellas. I
that's
remember
okay.
those call-in days.
Well, you could actually now you know that we're actually here, right? That we have a studio. And okay, let's get to Georgia. They confused the hell out of me. There are times when I'm like, damn, and they have that ability. And then there are times like, what are you doing? Do they play with their food too much, Graham? And secondly, do they play up or down to the competition, or is that a lazy narrative?
No, I mean, I think you're just as confused as all of us on the beat are, right? I mean, there is all these questions. You would think coming into that Georgia Tech game, a rivalry game at home, under the lights, packed crowd, and a game that you would think is basically a playoff elimination game or a game that could clinch you in the playoff, you would have expected them to come out looking a little more frisky than they did on Friday when they went down 17-0 to Georgia Tech. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say that they have kind of played up and down at times this year. The only game that they have played in where they came out in the first quarter and I really thought to myself, this looks like the Georgia defense, was when they were on the road in Austin, where, everyone's eyes were on that game. Texas was a favorite. Texas, I think, was number 1 or number 2 in the country. They were the higher ranked team. So I'm interested to see if they can kind of recreate that on Saturday when they get Texas again. But on the whole, you look at these guys that came back like Carson Beck, and they all came back after losing in the SEC championship game to Alabama last year. And I think as many big games as this program has played over the last 3 years and that 36-0 run of regular season games, that maybe it's just hard to fool them into thinking that some of these in-conference games that, they're favored by 2 touchdowns in are that big of a game anymore. I'm not sure.
Graham, Carson Beck has been very frustrating for Georgia fans this year, and he has throws where you're like, holy cow, that's a first pick in the draft throw. Then he has games that say that's a 4th-round draft pick project quarterback game. What has been the reason for his up and downs? Is it as simple as, it's not just totally on him. They don't have the same kind of skill players they did, and they've had kind of a revolving door of offensive line that they didn't really have in the past?
Yeah, so my theory on Carson, and it kind of tracks with some of the things that both he and Kirby have said, is that they came out early in the year, and like you said, skill player drop off. No Brock Bowers, no Ladd McConkey. Those 2 guys are 1 and 2 in the NFL in rookie receiving yards right now, and those 2 are gone. And I don't think he could really find that go-to guy and the one that you can trust. And Colby Young kind of looked like he might become that. Boom, suspended. Right there's been injuries at that position as well to go with that talent drop off. So it's been a revolving door, and they've led the FBS in drops, throughout most of the season. And I think he got to a point where he looked around and said, we've got 3 downs. If 2 of those are passing downs, then there's a good chance that maybe 1 out of 2, I'm going to get the ball caught. So I better be perfect, and I better make the most out of each play. And I think he started to put too much of an importance on some of these plays, and it led to him just trying to attempt these throws that nobody, even in the NFL, is going to make. And he's trying to thread balls between 3 defenders up the middle of the field. Like, it's just not going to happen. And I think he sort of went through a little bit of a down period, or a lack of sort of comfortability or confidence. I'm not sure how to phrase it exactly, but I think he kind of lost himself a little bit in the middle of the season, and then found himself and found a way to kind of accept that there's going to be some drops. It's okay for me to be frustrated about that for 5 seconds, and then I got to flush it and I got to move on to the next play. But I can't let, my concern over the receiving core lead to bad decisions. And give him credit. The last 3 games, 0 interceptions. I think, 12 touchdowns in the last 3 games. All of those have been at home, and there's definitely been a pattern of he's played better at home than on the road for sure. But that and I think he's gotten some offensive linemen healthy, and that's helped them a lot. They were starting a redshirt freshman at center at one point. Tate Ravledge, who's an All-American level guard, was out for a month. I think getting one of those two things figured out has kind of allowed him to get back comfortable again.
Yeah, there's stretches in which they are so brilliant. And then there's like early on with Tennessee. We know what happened after they had the big lead against Texas. And then last week against Georgia Tech. And then they scorch, I've using that word in our chat room a lot, Clemson to open up the year. And you're like, okay, here they go. Of all the reasons, you mentioned the offensive line or what has maybe not gone as well as they thought when the year started?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they have struggled to run the football. And Kirby talks about this all the time from a defensive standpoint. Like in this league or in any league, if you can make a team one-dimensional, there's a lot of advantages that start happening defensively. And like you saw that against Ole Miss, where Georgia got to a game state where it was obvious that they had to pass the ball, and they just couldn't block those guys on the edge. So I think, you had Trevor Etienne that was carrying the load for them at running back and was phenomenal in that Texas game. And he comes out after the bye week against Florida, his old team, and has a rib injury early in that game and has not really played since. And then you had two other running backs who they expected to be in their top three that were gone. I mean, they were starting a true freshman at running back who was their fourth running back coming into the season, and the fifth guy was dealing with an ankle injury. So, I mean, they've had walk-ons and all sorts of guys that they've kind of tried to like incorporate into the running back position to keep guys fresh. They got Roderick Robinson back last week for the first time this season. He played and was impactful from a receiving standpoint, but they've become like a 65% passing team some weeks, and that's put even more load on Beck. And I think that this offensive line, because of those injuries, for whatever reason, Georgia has always, over these last few years, been an offensive line that kind of starts the season a little bit sketchy from a run block standpoint, and they kind of play their way into a rhythm. And with two starters out of your first five for basically the entire season, they never really found that rhythm and that chemistry. They had some nice moments in the second half against Georgia Tech, but what they saw against Georgia Tech is not what they're going to see against Texas on the defensive line, obviously. So that is the question for me. I think anytime Georgia's playing a big football game right now is, can they run the ball enough, not to, rip off 50-yarders, but can they run the ball enough to get 4 yards on 1st and 10 and remain somewhat unpredictable in terms of pass run?
They're 101st in the country in rushing offense, which is staggering. They have a lot of rushing touchdowns, 22. And then it sounds like their running back room is similar to what Texas had to deal with. Mm-hmm. Baxter got hurt and others got hurt. And then all of a sudden, Quintravian Wisner, the last 2 weeks, has been a monster. Your thoughts about what you saw from him in their win against A&M, because he seems to be on quite the roll.
Yeah, I mean, I think, anyone that's trying to sort of handicap this Georgia-Texas matchup based off what we saw the first time around, Texas looks very different in terms of how they are running the football. They look physical. They look great up front. And Wisner was kind of banged up coming into that first matchup, right? So you expect, he's going to carry the ball 20 times, I think, on Saturday. And that changes the calculus a lot for Georgia. In that game in Austin, Georgia got up and they kind of did that thing we were just talking about, where they were able to make Texas one-dimensional. They were able to kind of play their safety soft and not let anything over the top. And Texas really wasn't able to kind of force anything downfield much in that football game. I expect them on Saturday to run the ball and to try and go heavy play action and try to kind of keep Georgia a little bit confused and see if they can force some guys up in the box and take some shots on the outside, because Georgia's boundary corners have been on a nice run lately, but they've shown that they can give up a big play many times this year.
How many times during the Georgia Tech game did you think, well, this is it? This is they can't overcome this. And then at what point did you think, oh, wait a minute, there's a light at the end of this tunnel.
Yeah, so I was in the press box, and it's funny. At halftime, I was talking to Greg Poole, who's a great guy, and he's covered UGA for years and years. And we were chatting about how this Georgia team just like never really got the responsibility of being Georgia and kind of the burden of everyone's going to give you their best shot every week because of all that's been achieved over the last few years. And kind of laughing about like, oh, well, this is kind of a fitting ending, right? To go down to your rival and lose this 31 game home winning streak and all this stuff. And it felt that way even with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. I mean, Haynes King comes in and runs the ball into the end zone, I think, with about 5 minutes left, and Georgia gets the ball back. I mean, at the 4 minute mark, they're still down 14 points. And they moved the ball really well, and I was on the way down to the field to kind of cover the post game and to see what the reactions to this loss were going to be. And I get to the field, and the first play that happens is the Dan Jackson forced fumble, and all of a sudden, you know, Carson Beck's running down the sideline, and things are happening. So when it got tied was really the first time I thought maybe they'll win this, but with the way the defense had played to that point, it almost felt like Georgia Tech is just going to come down here and kick a field goal or something and win. It was odd to watch that overtime period play out because Georgia kept having these 2-point conversion opportunities to win the game and kept missing them. And it eventually became this spot where it went from feeling like it would be a miracle for them to win this game to, it would be really ugly for them to lose this game on, 4 missed 2-point opportunities or whatever it would have been. So it was a wide swing of emotions. You could kind of feel the stadium go from this relief and excitement and ecstasy to, I think, great anxiety around, are we really going to blow this comeback and this kind of miracle fumble?
What was occurring to me in overtime was neither of these two teams has a good 2-point play. Both these coaching staffs,
or they both have great 2-point defenses.
Yeah, but nobody has a play that's just the play that they can go to, because by the time we got into the seventh overtime, I'm like, yeah, if they're getting it, it's just by pure execution, because there's nothing here that is innovative or whatever, was my thought.
Well, so the interesting kind of wrinkle in all that is that Georgia Tech's offensive coordinator is Buster Faulkner, who worked for Georgia for 3 years. He was Todd Monken's right-hand man. He was kind of the go-between between Monken and Stetson Bennett. There's a great familiarity between these two staffs. And Kirby admitted post-game that in between these overtime periods, he was on the headset talking to Georgia's offensive staff saying, you guys know Buster. What do you think he's going to run right here? And I watched Kirby throughout overtime from the sideline. Like, I thought you actually got a pretty good look at this is the value that Kirby Smart gives you and his experience as a defensive coordinator, because it felt very much like he took over a lot of the defensive signals and play calling during that overtime. And there was the Dan Jackson has a sack, I think, in the 5th overtime to snuff out a chance that Georgia Tech had to win the game. And right before the snap, Kirby walks out and tells him something, basically gives him a signal and says, if they do this, go. And Tech does it, and Dan Jackson takes up the middle for a sack. So it really did feel like they knew what the other was going to do. But I just couldn't believe that the way Georgia Tech had run the football in that game, that we only saw one real rushing attempt from them, and it came from the 1-yard line after a pass interference penalty. I would have handed the ball off to their running back and kind of dared Georgia to stop that a couple times in a row, the way things were going, because they had moved Georgia up front all night, in my opinion.
Graham, I'm not one, and people know me. I am never one that one call can create a game being lost, make a play, even if it's the last play of the game. Were you surprised at all that they did not, even going into commercial break, look at the possibility on the Haynes King fumble of a targeting call? Were you surprised they didn't look at that at all?
So my thought was that they were, because during that commercial break, the official was standing over the ball, and he was, had his finger on the earpiece, kind of the communicator, and it seemed like there was this really long review that was happening. I'm talking 2 to 3 minutes. He was standing over the ball and not moving. And it was very clearly, obviously, a fumble. So it didn't feel possible to me that they could be looking at that aspect of the play for that long. So I think they reviewed for targeting in this situation of like, are we going to have the officials come and look at this? And whoever at the replay office said, we don't see this as close enough to being a targeting to put it under review. Now, a lot of people will disagree with that. A lot of that might be controversial. But I would say there's been a lot of talk about officials in that game, since that game. And there's calls in that game where, Georgia gets called for a PI in the back of the end zone and in overtime that puts Tech a yard away from a win. And that was kind of a borderline call on a throw that might not have been catchable. Like, there was a lot of stuff in that game that I think you can say, this was a call that maybe went Georgia Tech's way. I didn't feel like the officials like swallowed their whistles for Georgia, but I understand why the viewer at home would look at that and say, how did this not get looked at? I just don't think it got looked at on the field level.
Yeah, Georgia again and Texas coming up on Saturday night in Atlanta. Heck of a game. That first game, it had ebbs and flows, and then they had to have the long drive to really put that thing away. Graham, thanks for your time. I know it's going to be a hell of a game. Texas is, and looks like they're better. Georgia up and down, but still it's hard. Yeah, it puts everyone in perspective of how unbelievable the Alabama run for how long they had theirs, of what Georgia in about half that time is dealing with now, or what Clemson eventually dealt with. And I can't wait to watch that game Saturday night. Look forward to it. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Always enjoy being on with you guys.
Graham Coffey, Dawgs Central, with us on 365 Sports.